Without humans knowing, giants have secretly been taking their children at night to eat them. But everything changes one fateful night in London when a young girl named Sophie becomes aware of their presence. It's the stroke of midnight, a time known as the witching hour when people tend to vanish mysteriously. Sophie, living in an orphanage, diligently checks that all the doors and windows are securely closed. She's well aware of the dangers lurking at this hour. While the other children in the orphanage are fast asleep, Sophie stays up, engrossed in a book. Suddenly, the orphanage cat detects something unusual and slips out onto the balcony. Intrigued, Sophie follows the cat outside and is startled to see an enormous man in the street. The giant realizes that Sophie has spotted him, and she's utterly terrified. She cowers beneath her blanket, hoping to remain unnoticed. However, the giant extends his massive hand into the orphanage and snatches Sophie, along with her blanket. Carrying her, the giant begins to make his way out of town, employing a series of clever tactics to evade detection by anyone else. After leaving the town, the giant traverses the countryside with remarkable strides, taking massive leaps with his long legs. Eventually, he makes a colossal jump and lands amidst some clouds, transporting them to a strange and unfamiliar land. Inside his house, the giant suspends Sophie in her blanket and starts preparing a vegetable stew. Sophie seizes the opportunity to try and escape when the giant isn't looking, but her efforts create a commotion that alerts the giant. He speaks to Sophie, explaining that she won't be able to escape without wings. Bewildered, Sophie asks him where she can find wings, and the giant responds that they are in giant country. Outside, the distant sounds of more giants can be heard, causing Sophie to plead with her captor not to consume her. The giant chuckles at her plea and reassures her that he's not a monstrous cannibal. He would never eat her. Sophie still insists that he's a monster because he kidnapped her. In response, the giant expresses deep remorse for his actions, especially concerning her parents. Sophie, however, reveals that she's an orphan and has no parents. Sophie questions the giant about the nature of the other giants in giant country, and he candidly informs her that they are not kind like him. They would devour her without hesitation. He also mentions that compared to the other giants, he is relatively small. He's considered a runt among giants. Curious about why he brought her here, Sophie asks him, and he explains that he had no choice. If she were to tell anyone about seeing a giant, he would be captured by humans and put in a zoo. In a bid to gain her freedom, Sophie promises not to tell anyone and pleads with him to take her back home. However, the giant remains skeptical and warns her that if she were to leave the safety of his house, the other giants would surely eat her. The giant then takes out a jar with a mesmerizing blue light moving inside it, and Sophie inquires about it. He explains that it's a dream, but Sophie insists that dreams are not real things. As they continue to converse, the giant reads Sophie's book, and she eventually drifts off to sleep. As Sophie continues to sleep, the giant ventures into a deeper part of his house filled with numerous jars, each containing lights moving within them. He selects a jar with a red light and starts working on it. Upon awakening, Sophie finds the giant asleep and seizes the opportunity to escape through a window. However, as she runs away, a significantly larger giant suddenly appears in front of her and seizes her. Sophie cries out for help, but the friendly giant merely closes the door to his cave house, appearing helpless. The massive giant flips Sophie upward and swallows her. Sophie wakes up, realizing that everything was just a dream specifically given to her by the friendly giant to demonstrate that dreams are indeed real things. The next morning, the giant is enjoying a fizzy drink called the Frobscottle, and Sophie notices that the bubbles in the drink move downward instead of upward like in normal drinks. She points this out, and the giant explains that upward floating bubbles cause unpleasant burps. Sophie counters that downward floating bubbles probably lead to even worse outcomes, but the giant doesn't seem to mind. He lets out a tremendous gas that propels him off the ground like a rocket, thoroughly enjoying the experience. As the massive, human-eating giant arrives, the friendly giant swiftly hides Sophie to shield her from the perilous situation. Sophie manages to conceal herself inside a pile of vegetables, narrowly avoiding becoming the giant's meal. The friendly giant, in an attempt to divert the other giant's attention, claims that he despises vegetables and only consumes human beings. Once the coast is clear, the friendly giant guides Sophie deeper into his cave house, where he helps her clean up. He offers her a selection of clothes to choose a new outfit from, and Sophie picks out a red jacket. When the giant sees her in the jacket, he gives her a peculiar, almost sorrowful look. Puzzled, Sophie asks him what's wrong, but he remains silent. Instead, he places her in a comfortable room inside a tree and explains that he's going out to do his job, which involves catching dreams. Sophie expresses her desire to accompany him, but he firmly refuses. However, Sophie's determination prevails, and after some persuasion, the friendly giant reluctantly agrees to let her join him. They step outside of the cave house and find the vicious giant sleeping. Attempting to sneak past them, they accidentally awaken the giants, who grab the friendly giant by the leg. In a desperate bid to escape, Sophie rushes and hides in a broken, old car nearby. As the vicious giants continue to bully the friendly giant, using him as a football and tossing him around, Sophie can hardly believe that he's not standing up for himself. However, a sudden downpour changes the situation. The sight of rain sends all the vicious giants running for cover, as they despise water. Seizing the opportunity, the friendly giant places Sophie in his bag and makes a swift escape. Unfortunately, he unintentionally leaves Sophie's blanket behind, and the other giants catch its scent, realizing that he has a human with him. Sophie and the giant arrive in a place the giant calls the Dream Country. Sophie is awed by the bright stars above, and the giant explains that on a clear enough night, his enormous ears can hear music emanating from the stars. He also mentions that he can hear insects conversing in the ground, ladybugs walking on leaves, and even plants and leaves talking to each other, all the secret whisperings of the world. Sophie notices the reflection of the giant tree in the water, revealing that it is brimming with dreams. The giant confides that at one point, someone referred to him as the big friendly giant. The big friendly giant jumps into the water, entering a different dimension, and he invites Sophie to follow suit. She agrees, and they both stand before the tree where all dreams originate. The giant spots a rare golden dream and attempts to catch it, but it keeps eluding him. However, the dream slows down near Sophie, and he explains that it recognizes her. He can even hear her voice when he listens to it. The giant places this special dream in a jar, labeling it as Sophie's dream. Sophie joins the giant in capturing more dreams, but she encounters a red one, a nightmare. The giant grabs the red dream and clarifies that it represents regret, showing people the terrible things they've done and suggesting there is no forgiveness. Exiting the other dimension, they continue their journey. Along the way, Sophie expresses her intention to call him BFG from now on. Sophie and BFG eventually arrive in London, where BFG uses his giant trumpet to blow happy dreams toward people, spreading positivity and joy. As they sleep, BFG narrates happy dreams to Sophie, who thoroughly enjoys them. While walking back home, they observe the other giants heading out to hunt for human children to devour. Sophie suggests that they need to find a way to stop this gruesome cycle. During their conversation, they realize that Sophie dropped her blanket back in Giant Country. Suddenly, BFG's expression turns stern, and Sophie wakes up in front of the orphanage. BFG informs her that because they left her blanket behind, the other giants now know of her existence, making her safety with him uncertain. Sophie insists that they can confront the other giants together, but BFG shares a heartbreaking story. He recounts how he once took another boy to Giant Country who saw him just as Sophie did. Consequently, BFG had to bring the boy to Giant Country. The red jacket Sophie found belonged to that unfortunate boy. Eventually, the other giants discovered the boy, and BFG failed to bring him back home in time to save him from their wrath. BFG concludes that he won't repeat that mistake with Sophie, and he departs. Despite Sophie's protests and warnings, she sits on the balcony of the orphanage and speaks aloud to BFG, knowing that his giant ears can still hear her. She senses that he is nearby and takes a daring leap off the balcony. BFG catches her, and together they return to Giant Country to devise a plan to stop the other giants. Suddenly, the vicious giants arrive and begin searching the house for Sophie, wreaking havoc in the process. Sophie narrowly avoids being spotted by the giants. Frustrated, BFG decides he's had enough and chases the vicious giants out of his home with a flaming rod. Meanwhile, Sophie hides in the room that BFG had prepared for the last boy he brought to Giant Country. She notices a picture of the Queen and comes up with a plan. They craft a custom dream for the Queen, depicting the giants eating children and the army intervening to stop them. Sophie and BFG are also part of this dream. The hope is that when the Queen wakes up from this dream, she will be inclined to listen to them and take action. Sophie and BFG arrive at the palace and blow the dream toward the Queen as she sleeps. When the Queen wakes up, she relates the dream to her assistant, who finds it curious because children have indeed been mysteriously disappearing across the country. As the assistant goes to close the curtains, she discovers Sophie standing there, and the Queen recognizes her from the dream. Sophie proceeds to tell the Queen everything, and the Queen believes her, given that she just witnessed it all in her dream. Sophie introduces BFG to the Queen, and they make somewhat awkward acquaintances. The Queen promptly informs her generals about the threat posed by the giants and sets up a lunch for BFG. Due to his giant mannerisms, the lunch becomes an awkward and humorous affair. BFG even convinces the Queen and all her servants and generals to try frobscottle, resulting in incredible gas. Following the meal, BFG leads the royal army to Giant Country. He creates a dream of regret to give to the other vicious giants, hoping they will wake up full of remorse and be easy targets for the army. While waiting, Sophie and BFG sit and discuss Sophie's golden dream. Sophie inquires about the dream, and BFG reveals that it's her dream of a normal life, one she can have back in her own world, not in Giant Country. Sophie asks if BFG will still hear her whenever she calls out to him, and in response, he simply points to his massive ears. The time comes to blow the dream toward the sleeping giants, But BFG realizes he's left his trumpet back in London. When he's not looking, Sophie seizes the dream jar and takes it right into the midst of the slumbering giants. As she is about to open the jar, one of the giants awakens. Sophie manages to break the jar, filling the remaining giants with regretful dreams, but the first giant remains alert and hostile, ready to attack Sophie. However, BFG intervenes and defends her just in time. The giant prepares to strike BFG when the royal army arrives and stops him. The royal army captures and restrains all the vicious giants, finally liberating giant country from their terror. The vicious giants are transported to a remote island with no escape, where they are condemned to eat only vegetables for the rest of their days, much to their displeasure. Next, Sophie wakes up in the Queen's palace and is greeted by her assistant. Meanwhile, BFG now has giant country all to himself, where he is cultivating a garden full of delicious vegetables and working on writing a book about all his adventures. Back at the palace, Sophie says good morning, BFG to the air, fully aware that BFG can hear her wherever he is, and indeed, he does. The story ends on a heartwarming note, with Sophie and BFG sharing a lasting connection. Thanks for watching this recap. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and feel free to explore our other recaps.